Maya Johnson, 28, stepped out of the community center into the morning light of Lincoln Square, Chicago, her red dress catching the sun like a signal flare. She wasn't here to perform, never had been. The dress, bold and sleeveless, clung to her frame, a choice born from her mother's advice: wear what makes you feel like you. For Maya, that meant color, defiance, a refusal to shrink. Growing up in Englewood, she'd seen her mother, a nurse, stand tall against late-night slurs from patients and profiling from cops on their block. Those memories burned in her chest, fueling her work as a community organizer, a path she'd carved since college, where she'd led protests against campus police overreach. Each step she took now carried that history: her mother's resilience, her own battles, the quiet fear of what her activism might cost her family. The square buzzed with early commuters, their eyes flicking toward her, not out of admiration but curiosity, as if her presence demanded explanation. Maya didn't rush or dawdle, she walked with purpose, her braided hair swaying, her gold hoop earrings glinting like small challenges. She'd learned early that existing as a black woman in public was enough to draw stares, sometimes fists. At 19, a campus security guard had shoved her during a rally, hissing, "Go home." She hadn't. That memory tightened her jaw now, her eyes scanning the square not for threats but for space she claimed with every measured step. Across the street, a black SUV idled, its tinted windows swallowing the light. Maya didn't notice it, but she felt the air shift, the way it does when a storm's coming. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her father: "James, be safe today." James Thompson, 55, a federal mediator with a voice that could silence courtrooms, had raised her to stand firm but always warned her of the cost. His own father had been beaten during a 1960s march, leaving James with a quiet rage he'd turned into a career dismantling systemic wrongs. He never spoke of it, but Maya saw it in his eyes, guilt that she now faced the same battles he'd fought. A low whistle cut through the hum of the square, some kid leaning against a lamppost, his grin fading when Maya's gaze met his. No anger, no fear, just a look that said she'd seen his kind before and wasn't here for it. The square seemed to pause, conversations dipping, a mother pulling her toddler closer. Maya didn't flinch. She'd learned to carry herself like a fact, undeniable, unapologetic. But the weight of eyes grew heavier, and she felt the familiar prickle of being watched, not just by people, but by something mechanical. A CCTV camera whirred above, its lens tilting to follow her. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Then came the boots. Heavy, deliberate, cutting through the morning like a blade. Officer Daniel Burke, 42, stepped from a patrol car, his uniform crisp, his nameplate gleaming. Burke had grown up under a father who ruled with a belt, teaching him control was power. Years on the force had hardened that lesson, his record littered with complaints, shoves, slurs, a protester's broken nose, all dismissed by a system that valued his badge over his temper. He'd been warned this morning by his captain: "Keep it clean, Burke. Eyes are on you." But the sight of Maya, her red dress a beacon of defiance, stirred something in him, a need to assert, to dominate. "Hey," he barked, voice low but sharp, "you don't walk like that here." Maya stopped, not because he ordered it, but because she chose to. Her eyes met his, steady, unblinking, carrying the weight of every time she'd been told to shrink. Burke's jaw ticked. He didn't like her silence, didn't like her presence. His hand brushed his body cam off, deliberately. He stepped closer, too close, his shadow swallowing the light on her dress. "ID now," he said, but it wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Maya's heart pounded, not from fear but from memory, her mother's stories, her own brushes with power that saw her as a problem. She didn't speak, didn't reach for her bag. Her silence was her shield, and it infuriated him. "You think you're special?" he spat, louder now, drawing eyes. His hand shot out, grabbing the seam of her dress at her shoulder. The fabric tore, a sharp rip echoing in the quiet square, exposing her collarbone. Maya froze, not in shock but in resolve, her breath steadying as she swallowed the humiliation. The crowd gasped, phones lifted, recording the violation, but Maya stood tall, her eyes locked on Burke's, daring him to see her, not as a victim, but as a force. The sound of tearing fabric lingered in Lincoln Square, a jagged note that silenced the morning chatter. Maya Johnson stood rooted, her red dress now a torn flag of defiance, the exposed skin of her shoulder blade gleaming under the sun. Her heart raced, not from fear but from the weight of history. Every moment she'd been told to stay quiet, every time her mother had come home from a shift with stories of slurs shrugged off. At 19, Maya had faced a campus cop who'd called her trouble for leading a sit-in. Now, at 28, she faced Officer Daniel Burke, whose eyes held the same contempt. But she didn't flinch. Her silence was a weapon, honed through years of standing against systems that tried to erase her. The crowd stirred, a ripple of shock turning to action. A teenage girl, her backpack slung low, fumbled with her phone, her neon-painted nails trembling as she hit record. "He just ripped her dress," she whispered into the mic, voice cracking not from fear but from disbelief. Her live stream surged, 1,000 viewers, then 10,000 in minutes, comments flooding, "This is assault. She's not even moving." A man in his 40s, pausing mid-coffee run, raised his phone, his jaw tight. He'd grown up in this neighborhood, seen cops like Burke patrol it like a fiefdom. His footage caught Maya's unflinching gaze, her stillness louder than any scream. Across the square, a mother crouched beside her son, pretending to adjust his shoelace. "Why's he yelling at her?" the boy asked, voice small but piercing. The mother's throat tightened, her own memories of being profiled flashing through her mind. "Just watch," she murmured, her phone angled to capture the scene, her hands shaking with a mix of fear and fury. The square didn't roar, it documented. Phones multiplied, lenses glinting like a constellation of eyes, each capturing a piece of the truth, Maya's steady breath, Burke's clenched fist, the torn red fabric swaying like a wound. Burke felt the shift, the weight of 100 screens pinning him in place. His childhood had taught him to control, to dominate, his father's belt had been lesson enough. But now, his badge felt heavy, his authority porous. "This is administrative," he barked, voice sharp but fraying, "put the phones down." No one did. His eyes flicked to his body cam, still off, a choice he'd made to shield himself. Now it was a confession. He stepped closer to Maya, his boots thudding, trying to reclaim the narrative. "Comply, or it gets worse," he hissed, low enough to evade the mics but not the cameras. Maya's eyes didn't waver, her silence a mirror reflecting his failure. The footage spread like wildfire. On Twitter, a clip hit 50,000 views in 10 minutes, tagged #LincolnSquareInjustice. A TikTok looped the moment of the tear, synced to a child's voice, "Why is he doing that?" Reddit threads dissected Burke's record, 3 complaints in 5 years, all buried. Maya stood at the center, her heart pounding with the fear she'd never show. She thought of her mother, working double shifts to keep her in school, whispering, "They'll try to break you, but you're stronger than their hands." That strength held her now, her posture a quiet rebellion that the cameras couldn't stop filming. A barista at a nearby cafe leaned out the door, her phone streaming to Instagram. "This is happening right now," she said, voice tight, "That's Maya Johnson. She organizes for us." The name spread, a spark catching dry grass. Maya didn't hear it, didn't need to. Her focus was on Burke, on the man who thought he could reduce her to a moment. She adjusted her stance, not to cover the tear but to claim it, her shoulders squaring as if to say, "You don't get to write my story." The crowd felt it, their lenses tightening on her face, her eyes, the unspoken power of a woman who refused to bow. The air in Lincoln Square thickened, charged with the weight of 100 phones recording Maya Johnson's defiance. Officer Daniel Burke stood inches from her, his breath heavy, his hand twitching near his belt as if searching for control he'd already lost. Maya, 28, held her ground, her red dress torn but her gaze unbroken, carrying the memory of every time she'd been told to shrink, campus protests, neighborhood stops, the cop who'd once grabbed her arm and sneered, "Know your place." She didn't know it then, but her father, James Thompson, was watching from the black SUV parked at the square's edge, his heart sinking with a guilt he'd carried since Maya was born. James, 55, a federal mediator with a reputation for silencing rooms with a single word, stepped out of the SUV with a stillness that cut through the chaos. His white shirt, sleeves rolled once, carried no insignia, but his presence was its own badge. Growing up in Alabama during the civil rights movement, he'd seen his father dragged from a march, bloodied but unbowed. That image drove James to law school, to a career dismantling systemic wrongs, but it also left him with a quiet fear, that he couldn't protect Maya from the same pain. Now, watching Burke loom over his daughter, that fear hardened into resolve. The crowd parted instinctively as James walked forward, his steps measured, his eyes scanning not for threats but for truth. A young officer at the square's edge stiffened, whispering to his partner, "That's Thompson, the mediator." The partner's face paled. They'd heard of James, the man who'd settled a citywide strike with a single meeting, whose name appeared in DOJ memos. Burke didn't see him at first, too focused on Maya's silence, which mocked his authority. But the air shifted, and he turned, catching James's approach. His jaw tightened, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Burke, raised to see control as power, sensed a force he couldn't bully. James stopped 10 paces away, his gaze not on Burke but on Maya. She nodded once, a small gesture that carried years of trust, of late-night talks about justice and survival. James's chest ached. He'd told her to be careful, but she'd chosen to be bold, like her mother, like him. He turned to Burke, his voice low, steady, cutting through the square like a blade through fog. "Do you know whose daughter you just touched?" he asked, not with anger but with a weight that made the crowd lean in. Burke's hand froze, his bravado cracking. He'd faced complaints before, dodged them with a system that bent to his badge, but this was different. The phones pivoted, capturing James's calm authority, his rolled sleeves a contrast to Burke's rigid uniform. A teenager's stream surged to 100,000 viewers, comments flooding. "Who's the guy in white? He's gonna end this cop." James didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His presence was a reckoning, rooted in decades of fighting battles he'd hoped Maya wouldn't inherit. "The law lets you wear that badge," he said, eyes locked on Burke, "but it doesn't let you strip dignity." The words landed like a verdict, and Maya felt them in her bones, a reminder of her father's lessons: power isn't loud, it's unshakable. Burke's face twitched, his childhood lessons of dominance clashing with the reality of a man who didn't need to shout to command. The crowd's silence deepened, not from fear but from awe, as if the square itself held its breath for what came next. Maya stood taller, her torn dress a badge of her own, her heart pounding with the fear of what this moment might cost her family, but also with the certainty that she'd never bow. Lincoln Square pulsed with tension, the air heavy with the weight of James Thompson's words and the unblinking lenses of 100 phones. Maya Johnson, 28, stood at the center, her red dress torn at the shoulder, a raw wound against her skin. The tear wasn't just fabric, it was a violation, a memory of every time she'd been told to shrink, from the campus cop who'd shoved her at 19 to the neighbor who'd whispered, "Don't make trouble." But Maya's eyes, locked on Officer Daniel Burke, burned with a fire her mother had kindled. "They'll try to break you, Maya, but you're built to last." Now, with her father, James, standing nearby, she felt that strength solidify, her fear of retaliation giving way to resolve. Burke's hand hovered, his fingers twitching as if unsure whether to grasp for control or retreat. His childhood, ruled by a father who equated obedience with respect, had taught him to dominate, not dialogue. But Maya's silence, steady, unyielding, mocked his badge. He barked, "Don't test me," his voice thinner now, cracking under the weight of the crowd's gaze. Maya didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the torn strap of her dress, adjusting it with a grace that turned shame into power. The gesture wasn't for Burke or the cameras, it was for her, a reclamation rooted in years of standing against systems that saw her as less. The crowd inhaled, phones zooming in on her steady hands, her unbroken posture. A young woman's stream hit 200,000 viewers, her caption raw, "She's not backing down." Maya's heart thudded, not from fear but from the weight of her choice, to stand, to be seen, despite the risk to her family, her work, her safety. She thought of her mother, a nurse who'd face down slurs to keep their family afloat, whispering, "You don't need their permission to exist." That truth anchored her now, her spine straight, her gaze a blade. Then, Maya moved. Not away, not toward safety, but toward her father, James. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a touch so light it barely registered but so heavy it silenced the square. It was a gesture of solidarity, of survival, echoing the nights James had held her after protests, promising, "I'll always be here." His eyes closed for a heartbeat, carrying the guilt of a father who couldn't shield her from this moment, but also the pride of a man who'd raised a daughter stronger than steel. The cameras caught it, the hand, the nod, the unspoken bond, and the footage surged, 1 million views in minutes, comments flooding, "That's her dad. They're unstoppable." Burke's face paled, his authority unraveling. He'd dodged complaints before, 3 in 5 years, all buried, but this moment, with James's quiet power and Maya's defiance, was a reckoning he couldn't escape. His boots scraped the pavement, a small retreat he didn't mean to make. The crowd felt it, their lenses tightening, a barista whispering into her phone, "He's done. Look at her." Maya's touch on James's shoulder wasn't just for him, it was a signal to the square, to the world, "I am not broken." Her fear, of retaliation, of losing her voice, melted into a certainty that this moment, this stand, was worth everything. James didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His presence, forged in decades of fighting systemic wrongs, amplified Maya's. The square held its breath, not for what Burke might do, but for what Maya had already done, turned a violation into a victory, not with words but with presence. The phones kept recording, the crowd kept watching, and Maya stood, her torn dress a testament to her unbowed spirit, pulling every heart in the square with her. The weight of Maya Johnson's hand on her father's shoulder lingered in Lincoln Square, a silent thunder that rippled through the crowd. Maya, 28, stood unwavering, her torn red dress a bold scar against the morning light. Her heart carried the echo of her mother's voice, "You're stronger than their hands," and the fear of what this moment might cost her family. Officer Daniel Burke, 42, stood frozen, his badge no longer a shield but a spotlight on his unraveling control. The crowd's phones, now a constellation of truth, captured every angle, but one lens stood out, Elena Marquez's, steady and unflinching. Elena, 34, a freelance journalist and single mother, held her camera with a grip forged in pain. A decade ago, at a protest, a cop's baton had fractured her arm, leaving a scar she never hid. That night, she'd promised her daughter, Sophia, she'd keep telling the truth, no matter the cost. Now, her lens framed Maya's defiance and Burke's aggression, a scene too familiar. Elena had seen Burke before, 3 years back, he'd shoved a protester into a barricade, smirking as she'd filmed. She hadn't backed down then, and she wouldn't now. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from purpose, her daughter's face in her mind, "Mama, you make things right." "This isn't your first time," Elena said, her voice low but cutting, aimed at Burke as she flipped her camera to show his reflection. "But it will be your last." The words landed like a verdict, her scar glinting in the sun as she held the lens steady. The crowd leaned in, phones zooming, a teenager's stream hitting 500,000 views with comments, "She's calling him out. That's Elena Marquez." Elena's past, arrests, threats, nights spent editing footage in secret, fueled her clarity. She wasn't here for fame, she was here for evidence, for Sophia, for every story she'd sworn to tell. Burke's eyes flicked to her, recognition flaring, then fading to panic. He'd dismissed her before, called her a bleeding heart during that protest years ago. Now, her lens was a mirror he couldn't escape. "This is administrative," he snapped, but the words sounded hollow, drowned by the hum of recording devices. Elena didn't blink. "This isn't a video," she said, turning to the crowd, her voice steady despite the ache in her arm, a reminder of her own battles. "This is evidence. I am a witness." The square exhaled, not in cheers but in awe, her words a call to action that resonated with Maya's silence. The footage exploded online. Elena's clip, raw and unedited, hit 1 million views, shared by activists, journalists, even a senator. A Reddit thread titled, "Elena Marquez vs. Burke dissected her history, she's the one who filmed the 21 riots," kept going after they broke her arm. Maya, still standing, felt the shift, her fear of retaliation mingling with pride. She didn't know Elena personally, but she knew her kind, women who carried scars to protect truth. Their eyes met briefly, a nod of recognition, two women bound by battles fought in silence. Elena lowered her camera, not because the moment was over but because it was sealed. Her heart ached for Sophia, who'd one day see this footage, but also swelled with resolve. The crowd's phones kept rolling, but Elena's lens had done its work, framed a truth that couldn't be buried. Burke's shoulders slumped, his authority leaking like air from a punctured tire. Maya stood taller, her torn dress a banner, her father's presence a shield, and Elena's footage a sword, cutting through the lies Burke had hidden behind for years. Lincoln Square held its breath as Elena Marquez's camera lowered, her footage already racing across digital highways, 1 million eyes dissecting the tear in Maya Johnson's red dress. Maya, 28, stood beside her father, James Thompson, her heart a tangle of fear and defiance. She thought of her mother, who'd faced down prejudice to keep their family whole, and the cost of this moment: retaliation, threats, the weight of being seen. Officer Daniel Burke, 42, stood pinned by the crowd's lenses, his badge no longer a shield but a target. His past, complaints buried, a protester's broken nose dismissed, haunted him now, exposed by the unrelenting gaze of a city awakened. The footage hit critical mass. Twitter threads exploded with hashtag Maya Johnson, clips looping the moment Burke's hand tore fabric, Maya's unflinching eyes, James's quiet authority. A TikTok edit synced the rip to a heartbeat, captioned, "This is America, 2025. By noon, the video had 3 million views, shared by activists, celebrities, and a Chicago alderman who tweeted, "This ends now." In a precinct 2 miles away, a clerk's phone buzzed with an encrypted DOJ memo: "Officer Daniel Burke, badge 52913, suspended pending review. Initiate Level 2 inquiry." The system, sluggish but stirred, moved under the weight of undeniable evidence. Burke felt the shift, his jaw tight, his hands empty without his belt's familiar weight. He'd dodged accountability before, 3 complaints in 5 years, all swept under bureaucratic rugs, but this was different. The crowd's silence wasn't fear, it was judgment. A young officer nearby muttered, "They've got his badge number," his voice low, eyes on James, whose presence loomed like a verdict. James, 55, stood still, his mediator's calm masking a father's rage. He'd spent decades dismantling systemic wrongs, but seeing Maya targeted ripped open old wounds, his father's bloodied face from a 1960s march, his own guilt for not shielding her. In a federal office, a deputy signed Emergency Action Memo 88D2, ordering an immediate review of Burke's record. The email was stark, effective immediately: "Officer Burke is on administrative leave. DOJ oversight required." By 2:15 p.m., the Chicago PD's Internal Affairs Unit received the directive, a printer spitting out warm paper that burned with consequence. Maya's heart pounded, not just for herself but for her family. She'd organized protests, faced threats, but this, her name trending, her face on screens, felt like a tightrope. Would her work survive the backlash? Would her mother's safety be at risk? The square's LED screen flickered: "Incident, Lincoln Square. Federal Review ordered. No cheers followed, just a collective exhale, phones still recording, steady now, as if the crowd had become an archive. A barista, still streaming, whispered, "They can't bury this." Her words echoed Maya's resolve, forged in college when she'd rallied against campus police, and James's lessons: justice isn't loud, it's persistent. The crowd's lenses held Maya's image, her torn dress a symbol of defiance, her silence a call to action that pulled the nation's heart into the fight. Burke's eyes darted, searching for an exit that didn't exist. His childhood had taught him to crush resistance, but Maya's stillness, James's authority, and Elena's footage had rewritten the script. The system, prodded by a million witnesses, creaked into motion, not out of morality but necessity. Maya stood, her fear of retaliation tempered by a truth her mother had instilled: they can try to break you, but they can't erase you. The square watched, the world watched, and the machinery of justice, for once, listened. The echo of Lincoln Square's silence reverberated beyond its borders, carried by millions of screens replaying Maya Johnson's defiance. Maya, 28, stood with her father, James Thompson, her torn red dress a vivid scar in the fading light. Her heart carried the weight of her mother's lessons: stand tall, Maya, even when they try to cut you down, and the fear of what this moment might cost her community work. The footage, now at 5 million views, had cracked open a fault line, exposing Officer Daniel Burke's history and the system that shielded him. Burke, 42, stood isolated, his badge a fading emblem, his past: 3 buried complaints, a protester's broken nose, now a public indictment. In a dimly lit studio, a former Chicago PD trainer, voice modulated for anonymity, faced a CNN camera. "I trained Burke," he said, his words heavy with regret. "He showed aggression early, too eager to control, not protect. We called it drive. We were wrong." The trainer's own history, decades shaping recruits, ignoring red flags, mirrored James's fight against systemic flaws. He'd seen his father beaten in a 1960s march, driving him to reform the law, but Burke's actions showed how far the system still lagged. The broadcast hit 10 million views, its headline stark: "When training fails, dignity pays the price." The Chicago Police Academy acted swiftly, spurred by public pressure and DOJ oversight. Burke's incident became required viewing, not to shame but to teach. In a training room, cadets watched the footage: Maya's unflinching gaze, the tear in her dress, James's calm authority. An instructor, voice raw, paused the clip. "This," he said, "is where we failed. Not just Burke, but all of us." The curriculum shifted, ethics hours tripled, dignity placed above dominance. Maya's silence became a benchmark, her presence a lesson in what power should protect. Cadets scribbled notes, some trembling, one whispering, "I don't want to be him." Maya felt the shift from afar, her phone buzzing with messages: "You're changing things." But change felt fragile. She'd faced threats after college protests, her mother warning, "They'll come for you, Maya." Now, with her name trending, she feared for her family, her community center, her life's work. James, 55, stood beside her, his mediator's calm hiding a father's turmoil. He'd fought for reform, but seeing Maya targeted tore at him, echoing his father's pain. "You're stronger than I ever was," he told her, voice low, eyes wet with pride and guilt. Online, Reddit threads unearthed Burke's record: complaint number 2, 2021, settled internally. No footage. A leaked DOJ memo listed 7 reactivated cases, each a wound the system had ignored. Elena Marquez's footage fueled the fire, her scar a testament to her own battles. Her clip, captioned "Evidence, Not a Story," hit 15 million views, shared by activists and lawmakers. The audience felt Maya's fear, of retaliation, of being reduced to a hashtag, yet her defiance pulled them in, her silence louder than any protest chant. In precincts nationwide, roll calls paused. A captain in Detroit showed the footage, saying, "This is what we can't become." The Academy's new handbook quoted Maya's stand, "Dignity isn't negotiable." Burke, suspended, sat in a bare room, his badge gone, his confidence eroded. He'd learned to dominate, not serve, but now faced a mirror he couldn't break. Maya, meanwhile, carried her mother's strength and James's resolve, her heart heavy but unbroken, knowing this fight, her fight, was reshaping the system, one silent stand at a time. A year after Lincoln Square became a battleground of silence, Maya Johnson, now 29, walked its streets again, her presence a quiet echo of that day. Her dress, a deep blue this time, caught the light differently, not a defiance but a continuation. The memory of her torn red dress, of Officer Daniel Burke's hand, of her father James's steady voice, lingered in her chest, alongside her mother's words, "You don't need their permission to exist." Maya's work as a community organizer had grown, but so had her fears, retaliation against her family, her center, her voice. Yet she walked, her steps deliberate, carrying the weight of a moment that had reshaped a city. The square was different now, yet the same. A small plaque, etched with "April 17th, Public Accountability," sat near a bench, a marigold tucked beside it, no note attached. A barista at the corner cafe paused mid-pour, recognizing Maya, her eyes wide with reverence. "She's back," she whispered to a coworker, who nodded, phone lowered, not recording but remembering. Maya's college protests, her mother's resilience against workplace slurs, had taught her to stand tall, but this walk felt heavier, each step a reminder of the cost, threats to her safety, whispers that her activism endangered her family. Passers-by glanced, some knowing, some not. A teenager nudged his friend, murmuring, "Is that her?" The friend shrugged but stared, drawn by a resonance they couldn't name. Maya's heart thudded, not from fear but from the weight of being seen, not as a symbol but as a woman who'd refused to bow. Her father, James, 56, wasn't with her today, but his pride and guilt, rooted in his own father's beating during a 1960s march, echoed in her resolve. He'd texted her that morning, "You're my legacy, Maya." She carried that, too. A street vendor, sweeping the sidewalk, paused, his broom still. He didn't know her name but felt her presence, a memory of the day the square stopped breathing. His son would later ask, who was she, and he'd answer, someone who mattered. The square's LED screen no longer flashed updates about Burke, now a fading name in a disciplinary file. His suspension had held, his career unraveling under DOJ scrutiny, his childhood need for control no match for the truth Elena Marquez's footage had sealed. Elena, 35, wasn't here today, but her impact lingered. Her clip, now at 20 million views, had become a touchstone, her scar a symbol of her promise to her daughter, Sophia, "I'll keep telling the truth." Maya thought of Elena, of their shared nod that day, a bond forged in survival. The square's silence wasn't empty, it was full of small tributes, a flower, a glance, a whispered story. A young girl on a scooter circled Maya, her mother watching, not stopping her. "Why don't people say hi?" the girl asked. Maya smiled, soft but sure. "They already did," she said, her voice carrying her mother's strength, her father's calm. The crowd didn't gather, didn't chant. They watched, their phones pocketed, their eyes carrying the weight of a year ago. Maya's walk wasn't a performance, it was a promise, to her community, to herself, to the girl she'd been at 19, rallying against injustice. Her fear of losing her voice, her safety, faded under the certainty that this square, this city, remembered her not as a victim but as a force. The marigold by the plaque swayed in the breeze, and Maya kept walking, her blue dress a new chapter, her presence a story that didn't need words to endure. Maya Johnson, 29, stepped onto the stage of the National Civil Rights Conference in Washington, D.C., her presence a quiet storm in a room of activists, policymakers, and scholars. No red dress today, just a simple black blazer, her braided hair framing a face that carried the weight of Lincoln Square and a lifetime of battles. At 19, she'd led campus protests, her mother's words, "You're stronger than their hands," her armor against harassment. Now, her heart held the fear of being reduced to a symbol, a hashtag, but also the fire of her father's legacy, James Thompson, who'd fought systemic wrongs since the 1960s. She wasn't here to recount pain, she was here to demand change. The hall fell silent, not with tension but with reverence. No banners, no applause, just eyes locked on Maya, phones pocketed, as if the room knew her words would be too heavy for fleeting clips. She adjusted the mic, her voice low, deliberate, cutting through the air like a blade honed by years of organizing. "I'm not here to tell you what happened to me," she began, pausing to let the words settle. "I won't relive a tear in my dress to make you feel something. I'm not your inspiration or your redemption. I'm what happens when silence refuses to mean surrender." A delegate in the front row froze, pen hovering over a notepad. Another, eyes closed, absorbed the weight of her truth. Maya's heart raced, not from nerves but from the clarity of her purpose. She thought of her mother, a nurse who'd faced slurs to keep their family whole, and James, whose guilt over her exposure fueled his pride. "I didn't choose to be tested," she continued, stepping away from the podium, her voice steady despite the fear of retaliation that still lingered. "I didn't pick the stage. But I chose to stand, not for your applause, but because enough is enough." The room leaned in, her words a mirror to their delays, their silences. Across the globe, her speech streamed live, not trending but resonating. In Chicago, a mural bloomed overnight, a woman in blue, back straight, with the caption, "She stood, we saw." In Atlanta, students projected her words on a campus wall, "Don't call me brave, call yourself accountable." Maya's voice, rooted in her college activism, her mother's resilience, carried the weight of every time she'd been told to shrink. "Stop filming our pain and forgetting our names," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "Don't tell me I'm strong. Tell me you're different." No one clapped. The silence was deeper, a collective breath held for a truth too raw for ovation. Maya thought of Elena Marquez, whose footage had sealed the truth, and her daughter, Sophia, who'd one day inherit this fight. The climax wasn't her speech but its challenge, to confront systems, not celebrate survivors. A professor in the back whispered to a colleague, "She's not closing a chapter, she's rewriting the book." Maya stepped back, no bow, no smile, just a nod to her mother's strength, her father's fight, and her own refusal to be anything less than whole. The hall remained still, delegates processing not just words but responsibility. Maya's fear, of being a symbol, of losing her voice, dissolved in the certainty that her presence had shifted something permanent. Her speech, unadorned, unscripted, was a call to action, not for her but for the world watching, pulling them into the fight with a clarity that demanded they act. 2 years after Lincoln Square, Maya Johnson, 30, walked through a Chicago community center, her steps as deliberate as ever. No bold dresses now, just jeans and a sweater, her braided hair catching the soft light of a room filled with young organizers. Her heart still carried the weight of that day, the torn red dress, Officer Daniel Burke's aggression, her father James's quiet authority. But it also held her mother's words, "You don't need their permission to exist." Maya's work had grown, her center a hub for change, but the fear of retaliation lingered, tempered by a legacy she hadn't sought but now carried. The incident had reshaped the world in quiet ways. Burke, 44, was no longer a cop, his badge was stripped after a DOJ inquiry unearthed 7 complaints, each a scar the system had ignored. His childhood need for control, learned under a harsh father, had crumbled under the weight of Elena Marquez's footage, now archived in training manuals nationwide. Elena, 36, still filmed, her scar a badge for her daughter, Sophia, who'd started asking, "Mama, will they listen now?" Maya smiled when she heard that story, seeing her own fight in Sophia's eyes. Police academies had changed. The Chicago PD's handbook now opened with Maya's stand, "Dignity before dominance." Cadets watched her footage, not to glorify but to learn, their instructor pausing at her unblinking gaze to ask, "What would you have done?" One cadet, a young woman, wrote in her ethics journal, I want to be her, not him. James, 57, saw the changes in memos he reviewed as a mediator, pride mixing with guilt. He'd fought for reform, but Maya had paid the price. He texted her daily, "You're still my strength." In Lincoln Square, a mural stood, a woman in blue, hands at her sides, with the quote, "Not her name, her choice." Schools taught Maya's speech, not as history but as a call to action. A high school in Atlanta chalked her words on a courtyard, "Don't tell me I'm strong, tell me you're different." When rain washed it away, students rewrote it, their silence louder than protest. Maya's fear, of being reduced to a symbol, of losing her family to backlash, faded as she saw her presence ripple, not in headlines but in small, unshakable acts. One evening, at a community event, a girl approached Maya, clutching a book titled Still Standing, its cover a silhouette of a woman walking forward. "Is this you?" she asked. Maya smiled, soft but sure. "It's all of us," she said, her voice echoing her mother's resilience, James's calm, Elena's truth. The girl nodded, her eyes bright with a future Maya had helped shape. The world hadn't erased her, it had learned to listen. Maya's legacy wasn't in the viral clips, now faded from feeds, but in the quiet shifts, a policy rewritten, a cadet's perspective changed, a mural painted in a city she'd never visited. She moved forward, not as a martyr but as a force, her silence a direction, not a destination. Her heart, once heavy with fear, now beat with purpose, knowing she'd stood, and the world had watched. To everyone who followed Maya's journey, thank you. You've walked with her through violation, defiance, and triumph. Her story isn't just hers, it's ours, a reminder that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. If her stand moved you, hit the subscribe button and join us at Revenge Ties, where every story carves a path from pain to power. Keep standing for your truth, and we'll meet you in the fight.